There were rumors of Aaron Rodgers being your VP at one point in time. Was there ever a formal invite to him to
I
run by
talked to
you?
him about it. Yeah, I talked to him about it. I I asked him. I asked him. I asked him, would he do it? And I really love Aaron Rodgers. I think he's got tremendous courage, and he does. He's committed to. He's a guy who does critical thinking, and he's somebody who you guys don't think a lot about politics. He's thinking about it all the time. He's skeptical of authority, and he has a very, very interesting mind. He's fascinating to talk to, and and I think he would, and he's curious about everything. My uncle, when he first met Jackie, who he ended up marrying, she was a reporter. I think it was for the Herald, and she was doing an interview with him, and she asked him what he thought his best quality was, and she assumed that he was going to say courage because his own history of demonstrating physical bravery, and then he had written a book called Profiles in Courage that was about moral courage among political leaders in our country, of political leaders who had made choices that benefited our country and ruined their careers, and knowingly did that. And he wrote it's a series of stories about these people who torched their own careers. And he had won a Pulitzer Prize for that book. So Jackie assumed that he was going to probably say that courage was his strongest, his best, but he said curiosity. He said that was his greatest attribute, his greatest, the virtue that was most important to him politically. And I understand why he said that, because it's one of the ways that he was able to keep peace, because he was curious about how Khrushchev saw the world. He was curious about how Castro saw the world. He ended up with Khrushchev having this extraordinary. We had, during that time when my uncle came into office, the CIA didn't know anything about what was happening in the Kremlin, because there was a mole in Langley. And as soon as they got a spy, a high-level person in the Kremlin would know within days, and they'd kill the guy. And so it was just a dark space for them. And the way that they explained what was happening to the Kremlin to my uncle, that it was kind of monolithic, and they all were bent on world domination, and that they had a plan, and they were all working together. My uncle was like, I don't think that that's possible. Mm-hmm. He said it's got to be like Boston, where they all, are trying to stab each other, and they're fighting with each other, and they have different worldviews, and there's some good ones and some bad ones. And he was really curious about it, and he went to meet. There's a picture here of him in his first meeting with Khrushchev in Vienna. And that was at the beginning of his presidency, and he was very, very hopeful of finding a path to peace with Khrushchev. Khrushchev rebuffed him, and Khrushchev was very bombastic, and he gave him a lecture on U.S. imperialism, and said that he wasn't scared of the United States, and that the Russians had won the war, not the United States, against the Nazis, which was pretty true, and that they could take any punishment. They weren't scared of anything, and sent my uncle away really discouraged. And but Khrushchev was an interesting guy, because he had been in the war. He'd been a general, and he was at the worst battle in the war, which was Stalingrad, where they were eating each other literally. There was widespread cannibalism. They ate the dogs, they ate the horses, and then they started eating each other. And he saw things that nobody, just terrible, terrible things. He did not want another war, and Russia had lost 1 out of every 7 of its citizens during that war. The Russians just, took the full brunt of Hitler. And then after the Cuban Missile, the confrontation at Checkpoint Charlie, there were two tank battalions that were facing each other off on when the Russians were building the Berlin Wall, because all of the Germans from the part of Russia that was occupied, East Germany, which was occupied by the Soviets, they all wanted to get out to the U.S. side, and so they were coming over, and so the Russians solved that problem by building a wall, this terrible wall. It lasted till 1993. And during that period, a U.S. general named Lucius Clay put bulldozer plows on the front of tanks and then went to plow down the wall. And a Russian tank division met him on the other side at a crossing called Checkpoint Charlie. And we were moments away from nuclear confrontation. And my uncle sent a message to Khrushchev, and Khrushchev said, "My back is to the wall." He said, my uncle said, "We got to solve this. We cannot start bombing each other." And Khrushchev said, "My back is to a wall. I cannot go farther back." And what he was saying to my uncle is, I'm surrounded by people here who want this, and I'm limited in what I agree with you. I don't want this war, but you got to help me somehow. And they ended up helping each other to solve that crisis. And after that, they developed this relationship of trust. And when I was growing up, my parents there was a Soviet spy he worked for the GRU, which is the military spy agency, and for the KGB. And this was the time the first James Bond films started coming out. So, we knew all about Russian spies because they were in the James Bond films. Mm-hmm. And so we were very excited when my parents began bringing this guy to our house. His name was Georgy Bolshoi. And they had met him at the Soviet embassy at a party, and he was very charming. He was kind of a squat. He was a real athlete. He could climb a rope with his legs stuck out like that. He would do push-up contests with my father. Mm. He could do the Cossack dancing where, he'd get on the table, which is very hard to do.
It looks very difficult. My knees, there'd be no shot.
No
exactly.
Chance. Well, you had an ACL.
Yeah, an ACL, then another one 2 years later.
Yeah, so you can't do it. But
no, can't do it. But I can watch and appreciate them, other people doing it. I know we've got to get you out of here in just a few minutes.
Anyway, I'll just finish telling this real quick.
Sorry.
Which is that Georgy Bolshoi, my parent, the State Department hated the fact that my parents were were having a Soviet spy at their home. We all loved him, and they loved him because he was really joyful and he was buoyant. But Khrushchev trusted him, and my uncle trusted him. And Khrushchev began smuggling letters to my uncle. And the first letter he sent him, and he sent him in a New York Times. It was Georgy Bolshoi folded the letter into New York Times and smuggled it to my father. And the first letter apologized for what he had done in Vienna and said, "We got off to a bad start." And he said, "I'm sitting in my dacha in the Black Sea and I'm watching children play and I'm thinking, we don't have a right to kill these children." And my uncle then sent him back a letter saying, "I'm sitting in Hyannisport watching my nieces and nephews play with my children. And, they have a right to grow up to write poetry and to play baseball and to, be political leaders in this. And if we blow it for them, it's our crime." Mm-hmm. And they started writing each other, and they hid it from their own intelligence apparatus, they were both realized they were surrounded by war hawks in the intelligence apparatus and the military, and that they were isolated in their own governments, and that they found each other, and that they had to keep the countries out of the war. And and they wrote 26 letters to each other. The last one was sent the day by Khrushchev, the day that my uncle died, and they were making plans to end the arms race altogether, get rid of all the nuclear weapons, and to join each other in making the world better for humanity. And Khrushchev was deposed right after my uncle was murdered, but it was because of my uncle's capacity for curiosity that he just could not believe that Khrushchev was this sinister, evil character that had been painted.
Right.
That he had to be more multidimensional than that.
Yeah.